Hello everybody, this is City Scrapper. I'm so glad you could join me on my channel today. Today I am making my fourth layout using the August My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I started off this layout with one of the beautiful pattern papers that was in the kit. This paper is from the 49 in Market Beached collection. I cut a circle in the center. I was very careful to get the circle as close to the center as possible because I'm just flipping the circle over and keeping it in the center of the layout. Now it turns out that the two sides of this piece of pattern paper were a little bit more similar than I realized. That's okay. I'm going to mount that circle on some craft cardstock, and that will just give me a nice place in the center of the layout to put all of my embellishments and of course my photo. I'm using my scissors to distress the edges of not only the pattern paper but also this piece of craft paper. Once I'm all done distressing the edges, I layer the circles back up again, and I'm going to be using the piece of paper that I used to cut the circle to back the pattern paper. So I'll have a little border of craft around the edge and then a border of craft around the large circle. Before I attach the paper down, I am again distressing the edges using my scissors. I don't often use craft cardstock, but I found that it worked perfectly in conjunction with this 49 in Market collection. Once I have all of the edges distressed, I'm going to ink the edges, and I ink the edges of this background paper, and this is using some Distress ink, not Distress Oxide, but Distress ink in Vintage Photo. I think Distress Oxide would work just as well. And then I decided that I wanted to ink the edges of the background paper. And then I'm going to ink the edges of both circles as well. And that'll just give everything a little bit of contrast and make all of the separate elements of the layout easy for the eye to take in. Now that I have all the papers cut and distressed and inked, I'm going to be layering them all and attaching them together. Right next to my desk, I have a little stack of papers. Some of them are pattern papers, and some of them are papers that have a smudge on them or something that makes them not so desirable that I know that I won't use, and I use those to back layered layouts like this. So I'm just layering now the two circles in the center, and I always use ATG adhesive to attach paper to paper. And now I'm going to start working on some of the embellishments. Now that leaf that you just saw, I had tried to emboss it with some pink embossing powder, and I just cut that out. It did not work at all. It did not achieve at all what I wanted it to achieve. So I'm not only gessoing over that one, but I'm gessoing over a number of the other leaves, and these were from the flower packs. I am gessoing the leaves so that when I add the paint on top, the paint color isn't competing with the green color that the leaves originally were. Now that all of the leaves are gessoed and the gesso is dry, I'm going to be adding some bright, colorful, and shiny paints to them. So what I'm using right now is called the Prima Opal Magic paint, and the color I'm using is Coral Teal. I'm painting two of these larger leaves with this color. And then I'm going to use a metallic paint, and the color of this one is Vintage Rose. And I just pull these colors from the embellishments and the papers of the 49 in Market collection that was in the kit. Now that I have all four of those large leaves painted with pink paint, I'm going to use a little bit of the Vintage Rose on the leaves that I have primarily painted coral, and then a little bit of the coral on the leaves that I have primarily painted with the Vintage Rose. And that just makes them, I think, a little bit more interesting. They still maintain their color for the most part, but they don't look flat. Next, I'm going to paint those two very small leaves, and I use some Opal Magic in blue gold. It's such a beautiful, very metallic color. So once I have those covered with the blue paint, I take out some metallic paint in white pearl, and then I go over everything just a little bit, just to add a little bit of highlight to all the leaves. I don't go crazy. I don't want to change the color, but I just want to add a few highlights in there. Now I'm going to be taking some die cuts that I made, and I'm going to be using some Distress Oxides to make them look more colorful. So using a dauber, I cover the entire die cut with some peeled paint. So that's the background color. Then I add some mowed lawn, and I try to add that more on the tips and not so much on the center. And then even further toward the edges, approximately, I added some pine needles, and then I finished off with some Distress ink in Vintage Photo. The die that I used for those leaves is from an Altenew die set called the Tropical Leaf Mix die set. Now I'm moving on to my embellishments. So I chose a number of embellishments from the kit, and I am just edging each of them with some Distress ink in Vintage Photo, including this three-dimensional piece here. And then I guess I decided that I wanted to add even more Vintage Photo to the edges of those leaves, even though I put one coat on there already. And now this is the photo I'm going to be using. This is a photo of both of my daughters, which is the subject of the majority of my layouts. And we were on a vacation in Cape Cod, which is our favorite beach destination. We were at a beach called Nauset Beach, and before we left, my daughters were kind enough to pose for a few photos. You see that I backed my photo on some pink cardstock, and now I'm popping it up using some adhesive foam. And now I'm adding some ATG adhesive to the foam and mounting my photo right in the center of the layout. I picked out this to use for the title. It says, "It's a beach day," and I thought that worked just perfectly for this layout, and it fit really well right on top of the photo. I had to trim this little wooden bridge, I guess it is, down a little bit. I thought it was perfect embellishment to put right in front of the photo, and I wanted to pop it up a little bit, so I'm using some fun foam to pop it up. And for some reason I'm a little bit off camera there, but I just cut some really skinny pieces of foam, and I backed the majority of that embellishment with the foam. I chose this large blue dimensional flower from the flowers in the kit, and I love those shutters. They, I think, look so nice on either side of the photo, so I popped them up on some foam and attached those down. I knew I wasn't going to change my mind on those. Now I'm going to start adding some of the embellishments around the layout. I like these flowers a lot, but I had a little bit of trouble using them as they were, so I just cut them into some smaller pieces, and that seemed to work much better for me. I like to combine the die cut flowers with the dimensional flowers. I used to not do that. I used to think you had to use one or the other, but now I like combining them. I think that it looks good to add things that are dimensional with things that are flatter. There was a flower left over from when I cut up that die cut to put flowers on top of the title. So I added one more, and I think that looks a little more symmetrical. I did a lot of prep work for this layout, as you saw. I painted some of the leaves, I inked some of the other leaves, and then I inked the edges of all of the embellishments I was going to use. And now I'm getting to finally combine everything, and this is the fun part for me. In placing my embellishments around the layout, there's really no formula for doing that, but there are a couple of things that I like to keep in mind. I like to make sure that I have all of the main colors of the layout represented in all of the clusters. So I have blue in each cluster, I have light pink in each cluster, and I have that coral color in each of the clusters, or at least I will by the end. The kit also had a number of seagulls, and I really like seagulls as an embellishment for beach layouts. So I added one that's on that little walkway on the bottom, one that's flying over to the left, and then I incorporated another flying seagull in the cluster that is to the right of the photo. I wanted to add a little something to the bottom, so there was a piece of chipboard that said sunshine at the beach. It looks like a little tag, so I put that in the lower right hand corner, and I also included 2 die cuts that were seashells, and I put those on top of the tag. Now I'm taking some of those leaves that I had earlier cut apart from the flowers that I have over the title, and I'm working those into the layout. And then I added 2 small banners to the upper right hand corner of the layout. The green one says good vibes and the pink one says best ever. Now I'm taking those leaves that I painted earlier and I'm tucking those in around the layout. I put the blue ones on the bottom in that small cluster, and I decided to cut some of them a little shorter. I feel that if they're the exact same length, they're not as interesting as if one's a little longer and one's a little shorter. And I did attempt to use the piece that I cut off when I cut 2 of them shorter, but it was just a little bit of overkill, so I decided to just leave it with the 2 long leaves and then the 2 shorter ones. So now I'm inking the edges of those 2 banners that say good vibes and best ever. I had decided on those a little bit later and I hadn't inked them, so to keep everything consistent, I inked the edges of those. Whenever I have butterflies or birds in the background, I always like to pop them up just because they're usually flying. And so I decided to do the same with these 3 birds. So I just added a little bit of fun foam to the back of them, and then I just put them right back where they were on the layout. I had mentioned on some of my other videos using the same kit that I had no trouble using all of these tropical florals and other embellishments on these layouts, because I feel that even though this isn't a tropical place, all of these elements are just very beachy or very summery, and I felt that everything went together. I want everything to be attached down to the page, so in some cases there are so many items layered on top of each other that I have to remove the whole cluster and then put on adhesive and then layer everything back onto the same area again. And taking a photo is really helpful in these instances so that I don't forget where I put things. Sometimes I think I'm going to remember and I don't remember so well. So I do try to do that when I have to take apart something that I spend time arranging. I honestly don't know what we did before cell phone cameras. I feel like I use my camera for so many different things other than just documenting memories. It's a super useful tool and I use it all the time with scrapbooking. The glue that I'm using is Aleene's gel glue. I ran out of the gel glue that I normally use and I had this on hand, and this seems to be working out just fine. I'm going to pop up those shells at the bottom on some foam, and you can see there that I just added some extra adhesive to that chipboard piece. And now I'm popping up the seashells on foam. The larger seashell on the right is going to have 1 layer of foam, and then the smaller seashell is going to have 2 layers of foam so that it can sit on top of the larger seashell. Again, I use the ATG adhesive over the foam to attach those shells down. And I adjust that seagull on the right a number of times, but now I'm finally moving it in a little bit closer to the photo, and that's where it's going to stay. For the top cluster, I had to lift a few things up, but I was able to basically keep the cluster intact and just add a little bit of glue behind each of the die cuts and the other elements that are on the layout. And I think that's preferable to having to take the whole cluster apart and then reassemble it. Again, I'm using some fun foam on these banners and I'm popping them up, adding some ATG adhesive and attaching them down. And I think that I have the majority of items attached down to the layout, so now I'm going to start adding some pearls. For this layout, I wanted to add some really brightly colored pearls. I picked out a variety of colors that I again pulled from the embellishments and the pattern papers of this collection. So there's a large bright colored pink pearl. I also included some Tiffany blue pearls in 2 different sizes. And then there are some very small, just a couple of them, green pearls. The color green is similar to the color of the leaves that are on the layout. And I also found some very, very small light pink pearls, and I am going to be scattering those around the layout as well. As far as deciding where to place the pearls, I look for little open areas or little spots that look like they need something to kind of finish them off. I like to put the larger pearls closer to the larger elements, and then as you get further from the center of the clusters, have smaller pearls. But none of those things are necessarily hard, fast rules or consistent throughout this layout. It's just something that I keep in mind. Here's where I pull out some of those really, really small pearls, and I thought that these would look nice just kind of mixed in with those pink leaves that I had painted. So I just added a little bit of glue and included a couple of those pearls on each of those leaves. Now I'm adding some white splatters to the layout. I just add a few. I don't go crazy because the background already has so much variation, and this is a really busy layout with lots and lots of embellishments. So of course I add more embellishments. I found these little, I guess they're almost like cattails, but they're white in color, so please excuse my lack of knowledge of exactly what this plant is, but they did remind me of cattails. So they're very, very small, and I didn't think they would be super noticeable, but they would just add a little bit of a different texture and interest to the page. So I tucked all of those into those two clusters on either side of the photo. And here I'm adding just a couple more of those really small pink pearls. And that completes this layout. And here are some close-ups. I wanted to say thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for watching my videos, for subscribing to my channel, for giving me a thumbs up, for leaving lovely comments. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate all of those things, and it means a lot to me to hear that people are enjoying what I'm doing. Please check out the My Creative Scrapbook website. The link is in the description box. You could see all of their beautiful kits. I hope everybody has a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.